just before we get on to the moderately serious business of talking about the dear departed, I like to have a little bit of interactive in these things, so I just thought I'd run a little bit of a game. I should tell you that there are no prizes, but please, would you put up your hand if your birthday is March the 22nd? Put up your hand if your birthday is April the 22nd. Okay, May 22nd? Yay, we have a winner. Well, sir, you share a birthday with Steve Rayner. June the 9th. June the 22nd. Yay, you share a birthday with Bruno Latour. And November the 29th. Well, okay, I'll let the son. Your son shares a birthday with Mark Sagoff. So those I thought I'd do that partly because it seemed like a fun way to start things off when I was looking at their dates, and partly because what I want to talk about to some extent is the sense of connectedness that we get at these events. And so I thought finding a few random connections that people in this room were incredibly unlikely to actually know might be a way to begin. And I'm very glad that my rough calculation of the odds was roughly right, because if I'd had to go on to the days of their deaths, things would have become a little bit more dark. Anyway, I'm here to talk to you about these six fine gentlemen, Burton Richter, Mark Sagoff, Bruno Latour, Steve Rayner, Calestous Juma, and David Mackay, who were all, I think, winners of the Paradigm Award, and even if they weren't, they should have been. And so a few months ago, Ted and Alex asked me whether, as my contribution to this year's dialogue, to this last dialogue, I could say something about these people who've been part of this institution's history, but who are in no position to take it forward, other than by inspiring those of us who remain. And obviously, that's a no-brainer. It's always an honor to be asked to speak of the illustrious dead. And what's more, I think I've enjoyed my time on this particular stage more minute for minute than any other public podium I've ever been offered or has ever been subjected to me. So why not try it again? And deeper than that, relationships and connections have been crucial to these dialogues. And I was lucky enough to know most of these people professionally, and at least half of them as friends, and those connections meant something to me, and those men have been dear to me. And there is only one, Calestous, with whom I actually didn't have a personal relationship, and for various reasons we can talk about, I've come to regret that quite a lot. So rather than go through the good that these men did, or itemize their excellence, or place them precisely in the breakthrough story, I've decided to bring out a few connections between some of them, between some of their ideas, between some random things that struck me while I was reading their stuff, even some stuff about me. And the last dialogue is a good time for us all to be thinking about our connections to each other and to the ideas we share, some of which we share as grounds of agreement, and some as grounds on which to achieve disagreement. Thank you, that's my contractual obligation fulfilled. So maybe these brief thoughts can help. So I first met Burton Richter more than 30 years ago, and my memory is of a cannonball with chins, smarts, intensity, and cunning. And he may be the member of this Sausalito 6 who is least familiar to the people in the room now, but he's probably the one most securely written into the annals of the broader world, thanks to the singular judgment of the Swedish Academy of Sciences. He won the Nobel Prize because in November 1974, the group he ran at Stanford Linear Accelerator, which actually I saw out of the window of the plane when I was coming in last Sunday, that group discovered the J-psi meson, which, as you all know, is the first particle to exhibit a quantum property known as charm. And it was the most crucial step in convincing particle physicists that such properties were associated with things called quarks. By the way, Bert did this when he was 43. Who's over 43? Good work, people. Discovered a quark yet? No, me neither. we are all Tom Lehrers to Bert's Mozart. And obviously, at this juncture, we should all want to talk about particle physics, but we must restrain that urge. And instead, we'll talk about names. So why was this thing, and I think this is a question probably got asked more than anything else about quarks, why was this thing called charm? And the answer, as they say on the internet, is because strangeness. Strangeness was a property of particles called kaons, which were unwilling to decay as quickly as physicists thought was appropriate. And the theorists decided that this was because there was something the universe wanted to conserve about the kaons. And they called that something strangeness. As the theories developed further, an appeal to symmetry led Shelley Glashow at Harvard to suggest that if some particles had strangeness, others must have a counterproperty as yet unseen. And this has to be charm. Glashow later said that it was because the basic appeal of that symmetry made it just seem like a charming thing, that it should be there. But at other times, he suggested that it was a charm in a different sense, in the sense of a protection, of a warding off of further strangeness to come, the sense that the universe might choose to be impenetrable. And as a warding off of strangeness, the charm quark was more than successful, it was over-successful. Burt won his prize, Shelley and others won their prize a few years later, and as some of you will know, particle physics became dull, at least as a spectator sport. In the world of accelerators, the world is pretty well described by quarks, leptons, and bosons in the way that became accepted as a result of Burt and Sam Ting's work in the 1970s, and Shelley and Steve Weinberg and Abdusalam in the 60s. That's the way we still think it looks. The physical symmetries persist. The emotional ones do not. The world is not, in particle physics terms, menaced by strangeness. Insufficient strangeness. Too much orderly charm. Life lesson, of which there will be few in this talk. Don't let the charm of symmetries outstrip the unsettlingness of strangeness. Burt's later move into energy policy, the portal through which he entered the upside down of the fledgling Breakthrough Institute, might have struck some as strange, from the fundamental mysteries of the universe to transmission line permitting and getting irritated by anti-nuclear protesters. But Burt saw it as a way to make a difference, and he also enjoyed it. The fact that biofuels can't begin to do everything asked of them is not a Nobel Prize-worthy discovery. As another of the Sausalito 6, David Mackay, showed us, a calculator, an atlas, basic agronomy is enough to work it out. But when Burt was part of a process that put the right numbers to the biofuel problem in a clear analysis, Jane Long tells me that he skipped around the room saying, I learned something. And to do this in your 70s, in your sweatpants and blazer, and with your cane momentarily left behind by your chair, that must be reward enough. But on another level, to go from high-energy physics to lifestyle and energy is, for California, a reversion to the mean. In the best of ways. High-energy physics did not burgeon in California because of the climate, or for that matter, because of the cleverness of the people here. It took root because of the technical things people had accomplished here. You could only build the particle accelerators that would develop into the hulking, world-changing machines called calutrons, clues in the name, calutron, if you had an industry that built the world's biggest magnets nearby. And the need to move power from dams in the northern Sierra to consumers near the sea meant that California had that industry. California, as we were reminded brilliantly by Jesse this morning, California had even then been in the 20th century longer. It had the big technology from which the big science grew. And it's still got the big technology, and it's still got those needs to distribute energy. Even though Lawrence Berkeley has closed its accelerators, and the accelerators at SLAC are now basically imaging services for other less spent sciences. The idea that I had when I met Burton Richter as a young person rather awed by the physics he had been unable to study to his satisfaction at university, I thought particle physics was it. the fact that now it is to some extent withering away, but these things that sit beneath it remain, has been a lesson for me. And it turned out, so great was California's dominance in the field, that you could only use these calutrons elsewhere if you had a wartime economy and were willing to sort of like invest a fair bit of GDP in moving them around. And so you'd then move them to the Tennessee Valley, where there was cheap electricity, and you would thus create at Oak Ridge the venue for a young British social scientist called Steve Rayner to start the dialogue with energy experts and technologists that would bring him both to the place of influence recognized when he was given the Paradigm Award, and into my world, which is to some extent the world of geoengineering, and into the influence list of anyone who thinks seriously about the wicked problems around us. Also, great silver hair, great dark blue shirts, no sweatpants, nice line and cattiness. Back to California. Steve was a great fan. I remember him rhapsodizing about it outside this building on an evening very like this evening. So were the other Europeans we're remembering. Bruno made his name in La Jolla, where fieldwork at the Salk Institute and time spent on the beach while his colleagues were doing fieldwork at the Salk Institute saw him sketch out this new understanding and underpin this new understanding of the scientific mode of existence. And that's what made him first a star in STS and then served as the basis of later questions about what it was to have a mode of existence. Questions which I must say I don't think he fully answered, but which absolutely resonate in the work he left behind. He didn't prefer California to Burgundy, where his beloved homeland, or to his adopted Venice, but he loved its hybridity. And David Mackay, oh, we've gone to the flipping around, so if you see anyone dead, please wave at them. Dave Mackay also loved California too. He came to he came to Caltech to do his doctorate. He loved the energy. He loved the innovation. He loved the physicality, actually, and to such an extent that, as well as all his other achievements, he played a significant role in exporting ultimate frisbee from California to Britain. Good, yes, for David. I learned that at David's joyous funeral, about which I've spoken from this stage before. Of the 6 on the screen, David was the last to be born and the first to die. He never got out of his "have you discovered your quark yet" 40s. He faced the strangeness of his approaching death with bravery, forethought, and love. At that funeral, we swayed our samba band-led way to the spot at Barton Glebe, Barton Glebe, isn't that lovely, where David had chosen to be buried, a spot where, in prior months, he had picnicked with his young children, so it would be a setting for memories of him when he was alive. In leaving this life, David really stuck the landing. And the attraction of that particular spot was that it offered a view to the site where David had worked when he returned to Cambridge after his time at Caltech. Californiophile though he was, he actually could not countenance settling in a place where car ownership was unavoidable. That workplace was the Lord's Bridge Radio Observatory outside Cambridge. Its dishes are small as radio telescopes go, much smaller than the dish up at SLAC, up above Stanford, that looks all curvy where SLAC looks all straight. Tiny compared to the Goldstone dish out in the Mojave. But they are radio telescopes, and as such, intrinsically lovely. Radio telescopes are one of the only 2 classes of human artifact which, in my experience, never detract from a landscape. There is something, think about it, as any landscape, have you ever seen a landscape with a radio telescope in it and thought, oh, I wish that wasn't there? Or indeed, have you ever looked at a landscape and not thought, ooh, radio telescope, that would go nicely? There's something about their sky-tracking parabolas that adds an attentiveness to the universe, to whatever charms the view may have. And to someone like David, or me, who has lost or abandoned faith or been abandoned by it, they offer a situated but universal secular grace, that great listening of the silence. The other artifacts which never detract from a landscape, as I'm sure you were about to ask, are hot air balloons. Proper canopy over the sphere hot air balloons, that is, not weird Arizona, oh look, it's a hot dog, is that Darth Vader's helmet? Gosh, Yogi Bear hot air balloons, can't stand those. Hot air balloons tell you that a landscape is being watched, that there are humans at ease, that there are things of no practical value in the geography of sky and spirit. I wish I could tell you hand on heart that Bruno loved hot air balloons. Instead, I can just tell you that I know of no evidence that he didn't. And I know that he would have either loved them or deeply distrusted them, depending on whether he saw them as engines of unreasonable inclusion in the sky or attempts to set apart and reify the surface below. And because I love Bruno and love balloons, I am plumping for the former, drawing support from A, the use of balloons in his, by all accounts, really terrible theatre piece, Gaia Global Circus, and B, because of his friendship with the wonderful Thomas Saraceno, for whom solar-powered hot air balloons are artworks and political interventions. Indeed, Thomas quotes in some of his agitprop from one of Bruno's last works, Ou à terre, Down to Earth. Each of us faces the following question. Do we continue to nourish dreams of escaping, or do we start seeking a territory that we and our children can inhabit? Either we deny the existence of the problem, or else we look for a place to land. It seems to me a question which ecomodernists and, in fairness, pretty much everyone else, does need to ask. Ecomodernism is, as we've been reminded over the past 24 hours, a sort of afterlife born from a death that may never have actually happened. And what is an afterlife but a dream of escape? An escape from the environmentalists and, it seems sometimes, the environment. A dream that says, no, nature can be spared. No, humans can thrive. It's a dichotomy which has to be appealing to someone who finds spiritual ease in the sight of things made to let people float separate in the sky, or in things that turn their back on the earth to listen out for literally anything else. But you have to see in such escapes into uncoupling a sort of sundering as well, a leave-taking, a sadness. In his magnificent essay on the theology of ecomodernism, really one of the best things I think I've ever read in the Breakthrough Journal, Mark Sagoff sought to reconcile the spiritual value of nature with the eco-modernist principle that for nature to be saved, it must first be made worthless. I was reminded of this saving by at least 2 mentions of salvation made from this stage in the last 24 hours. By situating eco-modernists in the context of the Communist Manifesto, which was a wonderful bit of intellectual jiu-jitsu, Mark took his salvation to be this salvation to be one of alienation reversed, of nature alienated being reconciled in itself, as workers alienated are made whole in communism. It's inspiring and humbling and beautiful and thought-provoking. It is rich in strangeness. At the same time, it reads like the work of someone wanting to believe more than it does of someone succeeding, which leads to a personal ending. At the 2016 dialogue, I experienced a profound sundering as my citizenship and my sense of self were pulled apart by the politics of Brexit. I stared into the fire pit outside here disconsolate, but not unconsoled. The people here, old associates, friends, fellow travelers, sought to comfort me on the loss. And they did not, but I loved them for it, for the compassion and the generosity, and what is good about America that reminded me so forcefully that I myself was not an American, that I was something else, and that I was unmoored. And I love the outsider-insiderness of my long relationship with this, and with you, and with California, and with environmentalism and nature, or, for Mark, natures. And I know, like everything worthwhile, that is tinged with loss. So, this morning, Tamar asked what to put on the placard. I don't know how it works to rally, or at a rally, but what I want on the placard is simple. Look for a place to land. And so I leave you with instructions for the next strange, charming, sundered and unsundered day, and for the discussions which will shape what comes after these dialogues. The words are from the last chapter of Down to Earth, after an elegiac evocation of my lost Europe, an embrace of its contradictions, a smile at its follies, a brilliant aside on its empire, a hope carried in faith without a touch of certainty as to what it could still be, Bruno stops his dream and turns to the reader, to everyone, to the living and the dead. There, I've finished. Now, if you wish, it's your turn to present yourself. Tell us a little about where you would like to land and with whom you agree to share a dwelling place. Thank you to the Sausalito Six.